Okay, so I want to start with a question. Just a simple question. Do you have a retirement plan? Maybe you said yes. Maybe you've got a 401k through work. Maybe you're tossing money into an IRA. Maybe you're counting on Social Security. Maybe all three. And that's great. That's genuinely great. Because a lot of Americans aren't doing even that much. But here's the thing. Here's what keeps certain economists up at night. What certain policy wonks whisper about at conferences. What almost never makes it onto cable news or your social media feed. Even though it probably should be the biggest financial story of our generation. The retirement system in America is quietly, slowly, and very systematically falling apart. And I don't mean that in a dramatic sky is falling way. I mean it the way a bridge falls apart. Not all at once, not in a single spectacular collapse, but bolt by bolt, year by year. Until one day someone looks up and goes, oh no. So let's talk about it. All of it. Because this story touches every single person in this country. Whether you're 22 years old and just starting out, or 58, and trying to figure out if you can actually afford to retire someday. To understand where we are, you have to go back to where we started. After World War II, America was riding high. The economy was booming. Companies were hiring. Unions were strong. And employers, big manufacturers, steel companies, automakers, they wanted to attract workers and keep them loyal. So they made a deal. Work for us. Work hard, work long, stay loyal. And when you're old and you can't work anymore, we'll take care of you. We'll pay you a monthly check for the rest of your life. This was the defined benefit pension. And for a generation of Americans, it was everything. Your grandfather probably had one. Maybe your grandmother did too. You worked for GM or AT&T or the city government for 30 years. You retired, and every single month, like clockwork, a check showed up. It didn't matter what the stock market did. It didn't matter if there was a recession. The check came. That was the deal. And for a while, it worked beautifully. But then something changed. In 1978, buried inside a tax reform bill that almost nobody read carefully, was a small provision, Section 401k. It was actually meant to be a supplemental savings benefit for executives. A little tax perk on the side. Nobody thought it was going to become the foundation of American retirement. But then a benefits consultant named Ted Benna looked at it and went, wait a minute, you could use this for everybody. You could set up a plan where employees contribute their own money, employers maybe match some of it, and the whole thing grows tax-free until retirement. Companies love this idea. Because here's the thing about a traditional pension. It's expensive. It's a liability on your books forever. You have to keep paying it even after the employee is gone, even after markets crash, even when times are tough. A 401k, the company's contribution is defined up front. You put in your 3% match, the employee puts in their 6%, and then, here's the beautiful part, beautiful from the company's perspective, whatever happens after that is the employee's problem. So through the 80s and 90s, company after company after company made the switch. They froze their pensions, closed them to new employees, shifted everyone onto 401ks. It was framed as empowerment. You're in control of your retirement now, which sounds great until you realize that most people aren't actually equipped to be in control of their retirement. And that's where the first crack in the foundation appeared. Think about what we were asking the average American worker to do starting in the 1980s. We were asking them to become, essentially, amateur investment managers. We were saying, here's a list of mutual funds. Pick the right ones. Figure out your asset allocation. Rebalance periodically. Don't panic sell when the market drops 40%. Stay the course. Think long term. And do this while also raising kids, paying a mortgage, dealing with medical bills, working 2 jobs, and just, living your life. Behavioral economists have a term for what happens to most people when you give them too many complicated financial choices with long time horizons and uncertain outcomes. They call it decision paralysis, or they call it present bias, this deeply human tendency to prioritize what's happening right now over what might happen in 30 years. And the data is absolutely brutal. About a third of Americans have zero retirement savings. Zero. Nothing. And I'm not talking about people who are 22 years old. I'm talking about people in their 50s and 60s, people who are years, not decades, away from needing that money. The median retirement savings for Americans between 55 and 64, the people who are closest to retirement, is somewhere around $87,000, which sounds like a lot until you realize that financial planners generally suggest you need roughly 25 times your annual expenses saved up to retire safely. If you're spending $50,000 a year, and that's not extravagant, that's pretty modest, you need $1.25 million. $87,000 is not $1.25 million. So we handed people responsibility for something enormously complicated without giving them the education, the tools, or frankly the wages to do it properly. And we are now living in the early stages of the result. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but that's private sector workers. What about government employees, teachers, firefighters, cops, state workers? They still have pensions, right? Yes, they do. And that's the next part of the crisis. Because those pensions, the ones that are still out there, still making promises, still telling public employees, work for 30 years and we'll take care of you, many of them are in serious, serious trouble. Let's talk about how a pension fund works for a second, because it's actually pretty elegant in theory. You have workers paying in, employers paying in, and the fund invests all that money. Over time, those investments grow, and when workers retire, the fund uses that money, the contributions plus the investment returns, to pay out benefits. The key number here is the funding ratio. If a pension fund has $1 in assets for every $1 it owes in future benefits, it's 100% funded. Perfect. Great. No problem. But a lot of public pension funds aren't at 100%. They're at 70% or 60%. Some are below 50%. Illinois, one of the most extreme cases, has pension funds funded at around 40 cents on the dollar. New Jersey is in similar territory. Kentucky, Connecticut, what does that mean in practice? It means there is a gap, a massive, growing, mathematically terrifying gap between what these funds have promised to pay and what they actually have the money to pay. And here's the really insidious part. Pension funds have to estimate how much their investments will earn in the future to calculate whether they're on track. Most public funds assume they'll earn around 7% per year, which for the last decade hasn't been crazy. Markets have done well. But it creates an incentive to be optimistic, because if you lower your assumed return rate, suddenly your funding gap looks even bigger. Suddenly politicians have to make hard choices, or raise taxes, cut benefits, reduce services, and nobody wants to do that. So the assumptions stay optimistic, the gap quietly grows, and the can gets kicked down the road until it can't be kicked anymore. All right, so let's talk about the elephant in the room. The thing that millions of Americans are counting on as their primary, sometimes their only, retirement safety net, Social Security. Now, Social Security is not going bankrupt. I want to be very clear about that because there's a lot of misinformation flying around. It is not going bankrupt. It is not going to zero. But it does have a very real problem that is coming in the next decade, and most political leaders are treating it like a hot stove, getting close enough to point at it, but refusing to actually touch it. Here's how Social Security works. Current workers pay into the system through payroll taxes. That money goes out almost immediately to pay current retirees. It's not like a 401k where your money sits in an account with your name on it. It's more like a relay race. Each generation funds the previous one. The system worked great when there were lots of workers per retiree. Back in 1950, there were about 16 workers for every Social Security recipient. Today, there are fewer than 3. Because people are living longer, birth rates have dropped, and the giant baby boomer generation is retiring en masse. Social Security has a trust fund, essentially a savings cushion built up over the years. But according to the Social Security Administration's own projections, that trust fund is going to run out around 2033, maybe 2034 or 2035 if economic conditions are favorable. And when it does, if Congress does nothing between now and then, benefits would be automatically cut by roughly 20 to 25% across the board for everyone. The average Social Security check right now is about $1,400 a month. A 23% cut would take that down to around $1,450. That's a $450 monthly reduction. For someone whose entire retirement budget is built around that check, that is devastating. And the frustrating, maddening, almost incomprehensible part of all this is that we have known about this problem for decades. Decades. It is not a surprise. The actuaries have been telling us. The trustees' reports have been telling us. The economists have been telling us. The fixes are not even that mysterious. You raise the payroll tax cap, or you adjust benefit formulas, or you raise the retirement age, or some combination of all three. None of those are fun. All of them are politically painful, but they are fixable. And yet, here we are. Here's something that doesn't get enough attention even within this conversation. The retirement crisis is not equally distributed. When we talk about these statistics, 30% of Americans with no savings, median savings of $87,000, Social Security shortfalls, those averages are hiding something important. For white Americans over 65, the poverty rate is around 7%. For black Americans over 65, it's closer to 19%. For Hispanic Americans, it's similar. Women retire with significantly less than men, partly because of the gender pay gap, partly because women are more likely to take time out of the workforce to care for children or aging parents, and Social Security calculates benefits based on your lifetime earnings. The retirement crisis, in other words, is going to hurt everyone, but it's going to absolutely devastate communities that already have the fewest resources to fall back on. And this matters because when we talk about solutions, when we talk about raising the retirement age, for example, we have to grapple with the fact that a 62-year-old who has been doing physical labor their whole life, a construction worker or a home health aide, is in a very different position than a 62-year-old who has been sitting at a desk for 30 years. Raising the retirement age sounds like a simple accounting fix, but it has real human consequences that fall disproportionately on the people who were already struggling. So here we are, a retirement crisis that affects tens of millions of Americans, a problem that has been building for decades, math that is available to anyone who wants to look at it. And yet, it is not dominating our political conversation. It is not a top news story. It is not the thing candidates are running on. Why? Part of it is just the nature of slow-moving crises. They don't make good TV. There's no dramatic moment, no explosion, no singular event you can point to and say, there, that's when it happened. It's a gradual erosion. And our attention is wired for drama, for urgency, for right now. Part of it is that the people most affected, the ones who will be hit hardest when this thing fully lands, are often people without a lot of political power. The people who didn't have access to good 401k plans, the people who worked in the service industry, in care work, in gig work, the people who couldn't afford to invest in the stock market. Their voices don't tend to dominate policy conversations. And part of it, honestly, a big part of it, is that the solutions are politically toxic. Cutting Social Security benefits, career ending for any politician who proposes it, raising taxes to fully fund pensions. Try selling that to voters. Telling people that the retirement they were promised is not quite what they're going to get. Nobody wants to be the person who says that. So the conversation gets deferred year after year, and the math gets worse. I don't want to leave you with just doom, because there are things that could actually help. Some of them are already working. The Secure Act, passed in 2019 and updated in 2022, made it easier for small businesses to offer 401k plans and pushed for more automatic enrollment, where workers are automatically signed up and have to opt out rather than opting in. That auto-enrollment change alone significantly increases participation rates. Turns out, inertia works in both directions. Several states, California, Illinois, Oregon, others, have started state-run retirement programs for workers whose employers don't offer plans. It's a start. Australia has something called the superannuation system, where employers are legally required to contribute a significant percentage, currently 11%, of every worker's wages into a retirement account, regardless of what the worker themselves contributes. The result is that nearly every Australian worker has retirement savings. The retirement poverty rate in Australia is dramatically lower than in the US. That's not a perfect model, and it's not directly transplantable. But it's proof that with the right structural design, you can get dramatically better outcomes. On the Social Security side, there are real bills in Congress that would shore up the trust fund. They're just not moving because moving them requires political courage that seems to be in short supply. And on the public pension side, some states are actually doing the hard work, increasing contributions, tightening benefit formulas for new employees, making more realistic return assumptions. It's painful, it's unpopular, but it's the honest path. All right, so what do you actually do with all this? If you're young, in your 20s or early 30s, the single best thing you can do is start now. Even if it's $50 a month, even if it feels meaningless. Compound interest is almost magical over very long time horizons. Money invested at 25 is worth roughly double what the same money invested at 35 will be worth at retirement. If you're in your 40s or early 50s and you're behind, you're not alone, first of all. The majority of Americans are behind. But the catch-up window is still open. Maximize your contributions. Take the employer match. If you have high interest debt, pay that off first, because you can't outinvest 20% interest, but build the habit. If you're close to retirement, be honest with yourself about what you have, what you'll actually need, and what Social Security is likely to pay you. Don't plan based on the full benefit without any haircut. Plan for some uncertainty. Consider working a few more years if you can, because every additional year you work has a double benefit. You're adding savings and you're not drawing them down. And politically, regardless of your party, demand that your elected representatives actually engage with this. Ask them what their plan is for Social Security solvency. Ask them what they're doing about the pension funding gaps in your state. These are not abstract policy questions. These are questions about whether your neighbors and your family members will be eating or struggling to make rent in their 70s. There's something almost poetic in a sad way about the nature of this crisis. We built a society that got very good at helping people live longer. Medical science, public health, better nutrition. We added decades to the average American lifespan. In 1950, the average American lived to 68. Today, it's closer to 77, and a lot of people live well into their 80s and 90s. That's a triumph. That's genuinely one of the great human achievements. But we didn't fully update the retirement system to match. We gave people longer lives without fully funding those lives. We shifted the responsibility for retirement security from institutions to individuals right around the time wages started stagnating and costs started rising. We made a collective promise. Take care of your workers and we'll take care of you when you're old. And then we quietly, incrementally, started backing away from that promise without ever quite saying so out loud. And now we're approaching the moment when the math catches up to the rhetoric. The retirement crisis nobody's talking about is coming. It's not a prediction. It's already underway, in slow motion, in the lives of millions of Americans who worked hard, played by the rules they were given, and are now discovering that the rules didn't quite add up. The question, the only real question, is whether we're going to talk about it honestly before the bridge falls, or whether we're going to keep not looking at the bolts until we absolutely have to. I know which choice I'd prefer.